Welcome back. My name is Sam Hassel, and in today's episode, we are going to be discussing 10 ways to ruin your admission odds. So why ruin? This sounds rather dark, foreboding, and highly pessimistic. So what we're going to be using today is an inversion way of thinking. So inversion thinking is, instead of trying to solve a problem in a positive direction and saying how would we optimize for a given solution, it is identifying the ways that we would not optimize for the solution or certain problems or issues and how we would create those. So if we had a business, for example, we could say, what would we do to help this business? Or we could say, what would we do to destroy this business? And then try to avoid all of those actions instead. And a lot of times this can tap into a bit more of our risk-averse mind. Humans are very subject to negative framing, avoiding risk, and this helps us to really stay away from things that would jeopardize a certain outcome or a certain solution. And so this framework is very powerful. It's been used by mathematicians. It was used by Einstein. More recently in the modern age was used by Charlie Munger, the billionaire investor, longtime friend, confidant, and partner of Warren Buffett. And so inversion thinking will allow us to identify what we could actually do to ruin our candidacy or jeopardize our odds. And in so doing, we can avoid partaking in those actions that would de-optimize our candidacy. And so we're going to go through starting with number one. So what would be the first way that we could really ruin our admissions odds and de-optimize our candidacy? So the first way would be to stay well-rounded. By staying well-rounded, by allocating our time toward a wide variety of disjointed pursuits, playing a sport, playing an instrument, doing community service, being on the school newspaper, being the class president, being part of the forensics club, we can really ensure that we have no focus. There's no particular theme to our candidacy. We can make it maximally difficult for an admissions officer to understand what we would represent in terms of the incoming freshman class at the university. We can also make sure that our application blends in sufficiently with all of the other countless students who adopt this strategy and have for decades and essentially run the strategy into the ground. We can ensure that when the admissions officer is reading our application, that they don't see any through line, they can't make sense of anything, they have no idea what the newspaper has to do with the forensics club, has to do with lacrosse. So we can make sure that they're maximally confused, highly frustrated while reading our application. They can determine, for example, what professors we would work with at the college, what research we would conduct, how we would fit into the freshman class in any meaningfully distinct way and have a unique contribution. And so we can really make sure that our application doesn't stand out at all. It's quite indecipherable. We have the admissions officer basically playing the role of detective, which of course they love to do because they have countless and infinite amounts of time to review 100,000 applications. Nothing better to do than to have them guessing what we are planning on doing at the college. And so this would be a maximally effective strategy for creating not only a non-differentiated, non-unique application, but one that also frustrates admissions officers and totally does not allow them to in any way project what our role would be on campus. Number two, don't make a decision on what your hook should be. So the opposite of a well-rounded student is a student who has a defined hook. A hook, as we've used it on this podcast, is going to be an academically relevant passion or focus. You could be the student who is committed to women's healthcare rights. You could be the student who is in the field of cognitive science. You could be the student who leverages computer science for some very niche cause or application. You could be the student who is passionate about environmental justice. You could be the student who is the social entrepreneur, the student who helps small businesses in some niche way. And these are all different academically relevant passions or focuses. They don't always have to correspond to a very specific major, that when we get to the application, we will have to do our best to match them to the given majors at the college. Now, a student who has an academic hook is the opposite of a student who is well-rounded. And a student who has an academic hook is going to ideally allow the college to project what that student's going to do at the college, what their very singular narrative is, their niche focus, and allow the admissions officer to really understand their application and have it have a compelling through line. Now, if we wanted to have a hook, many students will then say, well, I don't know what my hook is. I don't have a passion. I am good at a bunch of different things. And so the best way to really ruin your candidacy would be to delay making this decision, which is what many people do. So they say, oh, I should have a hook, but I don't have a perfect answer to this question. I don't know exactly what it is. So I'm going to experiment for multiple years. I'm going to maybe do humanities over the one summer. Then I'm going to do STEM over the next summer. Then I'm going to just waste a bunch of time trying to find a perfect answer to this question. What I'm also going to do is I'm going to try to make this extremely difficult by increasing the amount of activation energy for making this decision by thinking that I am now making a decision for the rest of my life. Whatever this hook is going to be, this is what I have to study in college, and this is what I have to do for the rest of my life. And by doing that and putting that pressure, we can really make this an entirely paralyzing decision rather than viewing it as a best guess or a probabilistic path based on the current and past evidence that we have of what the student is passionate about, how they allocate their free time, what their hobbies are, and what their interests are at this particular point in time. And so by maximally delaying, we increase the opportunity cost. We move further behind students who just honestly might have found what their true passion and life calling is when they were in second grade, in some cases even earlier than that, or just students who can actually make a decision. And instead of trying to be perfect, they will be perfecting over time and iterating through. They've made a decision. It's going to be not perfect, almost by definition, but they will constantly iterate. They have made a best guess hypothesis, and they will keep iterating, but they will be building a candidacy while they are iterating. And while we're doing nothing, we can maximally fall behind the student who's willing to make a decision or the student who just happened to actually have found their true passion. And we can ensure that we're not building our candidacy in any focused direction. And we are, again, just creating a competitive liability compared to students who have made a decision, who understand the game of admissions, and that this is very much a 3, 4, 5-year path and trajectory. And once we get into the college, we can very often change our minds. Number 3, don't track your time or progress. So one of the best ways of not making any progress is not measuring it, not ever writing down how you allocate your time. This will make it sufficiently nebulous such that if you never write down how you actually allocate your time, you can never actually see how much time you waste, or you can never actually take your true allocation of time and then compare it to how you would be allocating your time in order to accomplish your goals. So if you are spending 8 hours a week on some given activity, it is not related to a given hook, it is not increasing your college admissions odds, and it is not a particularly good use of your time, you can just ensure that that 8 hours a week just keeps going right down the drain and you're not using it for anything more productive. And so by not writing any of this down, not measuring it, we can just ensure that we stay sufficiently nebulous and in this state where we're just continually spinning our wheels, not very mindful of how our time is being allocated, because of course time is not a very precious asset at all. Number 4, we want to really try to be as low agency as we possibly can. So a low agency student would be one who doesn't speak up when they're trying to get opportunities. They don't send follow-up emails or reminders. Why would we do that? That might increase the chance the person responds or actually sends a follow-up. They would stop sending emails for opportunities when they're not getting immediate success. They don't innovate. We wouldn't want to lead if we stepped up and we led a little bit or tried to stand out. That would not be good. We want to really fully embrace and accept the status quo. So we don't want to step on anybody's feet. We don't want to try to change any of the policies of a club or make any contributions or try to make things better. Making things better really would be very bad, because an admissions officer, if you're trying to make things better versus just accepting the status quo, an admissions officer might actually start liking your application and saying this might be a student who may contribute to our school and to the world beyond in some meaningful way. So we really don't want to upset the status quo at all or disrupt the current way of doing things. We don't want to have opinions. Those are very dangerous. We generally just want to be present. So we just want to attend the meetings in a club, say we were there. If we're doing research, we mostly want to just follow to a T what the professor says. We don't ever want to take any extra initiative. Definitely never try to be 15 minutes early. Definitely never leave an hour late. Make sure that you always clock out exactly when you're supposed to, because if you didn't do that, then you might actually stand out a little bit. And we don't want to do that. We want to make sure that we're doing as little as we possibly can and just sort of being there, being present. We also want to make sure that we're waiting for permission, because by waiting for permission all the time and waiting for everybody to tell us to do something, we can fully relegate our endeavors, our opportunities, our futures, our outcomes to other people, because we'll just wait on them instead of possibly disrupting things and sort of saying this needs to happen now or this needs to happen differently. So through all of these behaviors, being as low agency as you possibly can. And so the visual that I think would be great for this is if you are someone and there's an opportunity inside of a house. Sort of imagine this, right? And you're sort of going up to the door and you're trying to get into this house to get the opportunity, right? What the high agency student would do is they would knock once, nobody opens the door. They knock a second time, nobody opens the door. They knock a third time, nobody opens the door. They knock a fourth time, nobody opens the door. Now they peek into the window. Now they go around the side of the house to see if anybody's in there. They then go back out. They knock a sixth time. They then go to a nearby neighbor and say, is there anybody in the house? They then try to get the phone for the house. They then see if there's a way to get through the garage. And then eventually they just find a tractor and just plow through the door. That would be a good visual for a very high agency student with maximal determination. Definitely do not try to be that student at all. That student, via their determination, is a very dangerous person. They have a very high probability of accomplishing their objectives in life. So we don't want to be that person. What we'd want to do is we'd want to just gently knock on the door once. And if nobody opens it, we just say, oh, I guess there's no opportunity there. I think I'll just give up and go home. So let's try to be that person. Number 5, stop taking the SAT and ACT before you hit a top score. So you've hit a 1510. Many of the top colleges, for you to have a 50th to 75th percentile score that you need, you'll need to have a 1550 or above. But you've taken the SAT 4 times. You now have APs. You now have schoolwork. And so you just stop at a 1510, right? You have lacrosse all of a sudden in the spring. And so you just stop, right? Instead of doing what it takes, you are the student who doesn't look at what is necessary. You're the student who just stops when you're tired, when you have competing interests or time commitments, rather than saying, this is what I need to get to, this is what is required, and I will do what is required. Number 6, waste time on early school visits. While other students are working on building their candidacy, and the visual that I often like to use, or increasingly like to use, and I mentioned in the last episode, is I often view this process, the candidacy building process, as like being an arcade, trying to rack up as many tickets as you possibly can. You're trying to build your candidacy. The colleges and the college application process is you going up to the counter and trying to exchange all of those tickets, your candidacy, for the various prizes, which are the colleges. The student who is going and visiting schools early in their candidacy is like the student who's on the clock, who is supposed to be earning more tickets, but is instead peeking over the counter, looking at all of the prizes and saying, I want that stuffed animal. That's a really nice stuffed animal. While there's other students out there who are racking up the tickets that it actually takes to purchase the prize. And so by going on school visits when we're in 9th and 10th grade and we have no idea if we're even going to be competitive for those colleges, we can ensure that we are wasting time while others are building their candidacy and partaking in the actions that actually would get us into those colleges, we can just be off visiting Harvard and Stanford and schools that right now on paper, we can even possibly know that we're competitive for. And so by doing this, we can also increase the chance of bad decision making down the line because we've dangled a carrot that we don't even know is going to even be in range. So we're also increasing the probability down the line that, we went to go see Harvard, we really liked Harvard, went to go see Stanford, really love it. But as it so turns out, our candidacy didn't evolve in such a way that that is even going to be a school that is in range for us. But we just remember the school visit, and now we end up making a really bad decision when it comes to making ED calls or choosing between early action schools when they come into conflict. And so by visiting schools and taking our attention away in the earlier parts of the process from doing everything we possibly can to actually ensure that we have the maximum number of options, we can really just increase the opportunity cost compared to other students who are working on their candidacies. And again, we can increase the probability of bad future decision making because we have dangled carrots that we don't even know at this point in time are even going to be in reach. Number 7, when asking for letters of recommendation, we really want to make sure that we put maximal trust in our teachers to just simply write the best possible letter. Surely they won't be writing 50 letters of recommendation for all other students who have asked them. Surely they've sat on an admissions committee for multiple years and, of course, have been on the other side of the desk knowing what all of the best content is. Surely they're not writing any cliches. If we leave it up to our teachers and our counselor for the counselor letter of recommendation, and we put it entirely in their court, we can also ensure, and this is very important, that they write fairly generic letters. We can make sure that there aren't any great anecdotes that we could have provided them. Their memory, of course, is infallible, right? So, of course, it would always be best to assume that they know us so well, they remember everything about us, because we are the center of our own universe, right? So surely we must be the center of everybody else's universe as well. What we don't want to do is when a teacher says, I don't have a recommendation material or a questionnaire, but I'll write the letter anyway, make sure that you don't go above and beyond to send them an email with a cover letter with bullets relating to your hook, bullets relating to various anecdotes that are very specific and detailed and show very specific traits that colleges look for, such as intellectual vitality, collaboration. Make sure you do not, at any cost, provide these types of potentially very helpful materials to your teachers, because if you did, they might just take a lot of the content and actually put it in your letter and make it very specific and compelling. If our teacher does have a recommendation questionnaire, we want to make sure that we just trust the teacher, that the teacher 100% knows what the best content is for selective college admissions. We want to fall straight into trap questions, like what was your greatest moment of adversity in my class? Because then we can volunteer information that might harm our application. So we don't want to think about this part of the process very proactively. We certainly don't want to furnish any highly specific details or anecdotes. We don't want to make this as easy for the teachers as possible because, of course, they'll just be writing our one letter. They have perfect memory. And of course, the most important thing in the world to these teachers in the fall, when they have a million other things to do, or over their summer, when they're otherwise supposed to be on vacation, of course, the most important thing to them will be to ensure that we get into the college that we want to. Number 8, pick majors that don't align with your strengths. So once you've built a certain candidacy and you start getting closer to the actual application process, most of the horses are in the barn, so to speak. We can't change very much. We can't continue building our resume. We're now approaching June for juniors. This is basically when you should be just about starting your applications, your common application and whatnot. And so at this point, you have a mostly rigid set of data that is not changeable. And so there is only one part of the equation that is changeable or that is fungible, right? And that is what you put in the application and how you choose to present yourself in terms of what majors you apply for, how you want to present your various activities, and how you want to create a through line in your application. And so you can't change most of the data. The only thing that you can do is you can leave certain data out, you can accentuate certain themes, and you can pick majors and specifics about the colleges that play to your strengths. However, if you do that, if you pick the majors that best fit the data that you have on paper, you might inadvertently paint a very compelling picture of your application. So you don't actually want to do that. If you're a psychology student, primarily, you've built a psychology resume. You do all sorts of things in mental health. You ended up doing some mental health research. You, as the student president, launched mental health initiatives. What you should actually do is you should listen to your Uncle Tom over the summer and say, well, business actually is a very lucrative career path, and I think that that's what I want to go into. And you should put business in your application. That would be much better, because then the admissions officer would actually be able to see a gaping disparity between what you're projecting out into the future that you would study and what you would pursue in life, and everything that you've actually done, which is the hard evidence, right? And again, we can then make the admissions officer maximally confused. We can try to, again, ensure that they really have no idea what's going on with their application or why on earth we are applying for business. We can then just make them say, oh, this is probably just another student who's just picking one of the top 5 paths. This isn't necessarily something they're passionate about, which of course will create a very non-endearing feeling in an admissions officer, particularly since most admissions officers are from liberal arts backgrounds, not professional or pre-professional paths. So it particularly will often be very frustrating to that cohort. And so by ensuring that we pick majors or a narrative that does not actually align with our strengths towards the very late stage of the process, we can again introduce a major liability into our application and our admission odds. Number 9, fall into essay traps for the personal essay in the Common App and then various college supplements. So what you really want to do is you want to try to be as naive as possible. You want to take all of the essay topics purely at face value and say, if I answer each one of these questions in the most direct way, and I'm a legal beagle about this, surely that will be the most strategic way of going about this, and I could be totally passive, and surely the admissions officers have my best interest at heart in terms of how they wrote these supplements. And so when we come across the Stanford roommate essay, let's talk about topics that are, silly topics, and let's talk about, how our shoes smell and how we have a dirty room and all the stuff that has absolutely nothing to do with painting any sort of picture whatsoever of what specific niche intellectual role we're going to play on the school's campus, right? So let's make sure that we really fall into these trap essays and go way off the reservation and turn these essays into personality pieces, because we know that admissions officers, what else are they looking for than to admit comedians? Of course, that must be what they're looking for. And then when we get to essays such as at Penn, and they ask us to write a thank you letter, make sure that you're going to end up talking about what most students talk about. Write a thank you letter to your teacher, to your grandma. Just directly answer the question. What you definitely do not want to do is you do not want to actually bend your responses in any particularly active, strategic way to spotlight your hook and your narrative, right? If you did that, again, you might inadvertently introduce a very clear, compelling through line to your application, and you might improve your candidacy and your odds, because they might actually say, hey, this is a student and this is the very specific intellectual role they'll play on campus. But if you write a thank you letter to grandma, you can accomplish multiple objectives. First of all, you can fail to optimize for what your intellectual potential is, because this has nothing to do with that. Second of all, you can also just blend in with all the other students who write the same generic cliche responses to these essays. And so we really don't want to think very carefully or very critically about these questions, and we just want to take them at face value. We want to fall right into those traps. What we also don't want to do is we mostly want to just think on level 1, right? Level 1 is just a stimulus response, right? Here's a stimulus, let me just respond to it or answer in the most straightforward way, right? I'm just a legal beagle, an instructions follower. Those are definitely the students who stand out in the admissions process, as in the resume building process, right? Again, very low agency behavior. I need permission. This is what the admissions officer wants. Let me just answer it very directly and straightforwardly, even if we know that this is leading us straight into the wheelhouse of very cliche essay, right? So that's level 1 thinking. If we did level 2 thinking, we applied level 2 thinking, we might actually think about Well, what are all the other applicants going to respond for this essay? What traps are they going to fall into? What are going to be very common responses? And maybe we should try to stay away from those responses so we don't actually blend in with everybody else. Maybe we should also take this again as another opportunity or another vehicle for making it very clear what our hook is, what our through line is in our application. And so by falling into all of these various essay traps, including the personal essay as well, the personal essay sounds like a personal essay. Let's write about some fun personality topic, right? Clearly that's what's going to get us accepted into a highly selective institution. Wouldn't want to talk about maybe some fascinating personalized insight or origin story for our interest that is personal and academic, so we get the best of both worlds. Let's just make it about some quirk. Let's just make it about something that's very funny and humorous. And again, these top colleges, they're really looking for the students who are comedians, they're TikTok dancers, right? It's big personalities. That's what it's about, right? That's what these highly selective colleges are looking for. They couldn't possibly be looking for very highly focused, intellectually driven students who will change the world. That can't be it. Definitely not. And then for number 10, now this one is particularly salient. And even if you had done everything else right to optimize your candidacy, literally everything, there's one way, there's one silver bullet, there's one nuclear missile that we can launch at our candidacy that will make it all go down the drain. So this is by far our highest leverage point for entirely destroying our candidacy. And this is not doing early decision or not doing it to the right schools. And so what we could do here is we could be the student who says, why would I put in a binding commitment to a college? Right? I can afford to do so. I have the financial means, but why would I put in a binding commitment? That seems ridiculous. I can just wait until I hear from all the colleges in the spring and then I'll be able to choose. And so by not doing early decision, which it would potentially increase our odds by 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7x over early action applicants, regular decision applicants. We can ensure that we give ourselves a much, much, much lower chance of admission. We can ensure that we're not in a very small group of maximally committed applicants who apply first ahead of all the other students. We can make sure that we're in a massive round of applications with all the regular decision students or early action students, where there's 50, 60, 70, 90,000 in some cases. For UCLA, 150, 160,000 applications. We'll just put ourselves into those massive, massive rounds. We'll ensure that the college doesn't in any way have any sense of whether we're coming to the college or not. So we could totally dilute the value of our candidacy, because if we think about it, and this is a very correct way of thinking about it, if we are a 10 out of 10 applicant, but we have a 30% chance of enrolling, we're effectively only a 3 out of 10 applicants. That sounds great. Why not be a 3 out of 10 applicants? Versus maybe we're a 9 out of 10 or an 8 out of 10 applicant, but we have a 100% chance of enrolling. And so to that college, we're actually an 8 or a 9. You wouldn't want to do that, because if you do ED, you are really signaling to the college that you're definitely coming, and you're removing a very important variable to the college, or something that they're significantly worried about from the equation, which is whether you actually yield to the college or whether you accept their offer. Given that many of the top colleges, even the most selective colleges in the United States, only have somewhere between a 40 to 60% yield rate, which means that most students, in many cases the majority or a very large minority, do not actually end up accepting the college's offer. And given the significance of enrollment management to these colleges, the importance of the yield rates, if we do ED, we would end up signaling to the college that we're definitely coming. They would feel much better. They'd be able to take us much earlier in a much smaller group of applicants, and they'd be able to confer a massive advantage on our application. So we definitely don't want to do that. We want to make sure that we end up in those regular decision applicant pools where anything can happen. We could be the best applicant in the world, but again, if you're a 10 out of 10 and the college thinks you have a 15% chance of yielding or enrolling, you're a 1.5, which sounds great. That can really make sure that we introduce maximum variance and maximum risk into our candidacy, which is, of course, absolutely fantastic. And by not EDing, we can really increase the chance that we end up at our number 8 choice school, or number 9 choice school, or number 10 choice school, because we are going to end up going through the chaos of all the regular decision rounds and the tens upon tens upon tens upon tens of thousands of students who are not committed. We could also make sure that in those regular decision rounds, there are students who have other hooks, as there very often. There are more underrepresented minorities, and there's more chances for students who happen to have our hook in the regular decision round. There's just much more the law of large numbers in the regular decision round. And so by not making a highly strategic decision to do early decision and to exploit instead of trying to explore and introduce a ton of risk, the chance of trying to maybe squeak out a little bit more in terms of our top college, or trying to hold out for all of those college choices. I'm going to have, 7 amazing options lined up, which usually doesn't happen that way in the regular decision round in the spring. By introducing this risk to our candidacy, we can really make sure that possibly everything that we built all goes by the wayside just because of one decision here. That is it for this episode. It's a little bit snarky and a little bit interestingly framed, but hopefully gives people a sense of a lot of the really big mistakes that people make in terms of their candidacy building. And of course, I said all of this tongue-in-cheek, and we should be trying to do the opposite of everything that I said if we want to optimize our candidacy. That's it for this episode. Talk soon in the next one. Bye-bye.